Good morning. My name is Keith Leach, co-director of NorCal Clean Cities, and I'm joined by our co-director, Tim Taylor. Welcome to the fourth in a series of webinars that we will be producing in collaboration with our partner professional associations, regulatory agencies, and our sustaining sponsors. NorCal Clean Cities, formerly Sacramento Clean Cities, is affiliated with the Department of Energy's Clean Cities and Communities program, a government industry partnership designed to reduce petroleum consumption in the transportation sector. There are currently almost 70 coalitions nationwide that work with government agencies and private companies to identify mutual interests and meet the objectives of reducing the use of imported oil, developing regional economic opportunities, and improving air quality. NorCal Clean Cities serves communities in the greater Sacramento metro area as well as communities across Northern California. We are currently in the process of expanding our areas of service beyond our current areas of service of Sacramento, Placer, El Dorado, Yolo, Solano, Butte, and Sutter counties north to the Oregon border and to the eastern border of Nevada. The Fleet Academy is a program being implemented by a partnership between the Northern California Clean Cities Coalition, the Silicon Valley Clean Cities Coalition, and the U.S. Department of Energy. Over a 3-year period, the Clean Cities Coalitions will conduct a number of educational events, both in person and virtual, to help fleet managers gain useful information from nationally recognized fleet professionals about operating their vehicle fleets more efficiently and sharing their experiences with the challenges and complexities of implementing zero emissions technologies. And now, without further ado, I would like to introduce our featured speaker for today, Mr. David Worthington, Santa Clara County's fleet manager. Take it away, David.
Thank you for joining us today. Appreciate everybody that's here. We're going to be talking about regulatory compliance and some regulations that we didn't cover in the first of this two-part series. I am the fleet manager for the County of Santa Clara, as well as I'm the chair of the MEMA NorCal chapter and serve on the board of the directors there with some other great people that are dedicated to the government fleet industry, but also to the private fleet industry as well. We want to make a difference and we want to leave our world in a little bit better place than we found it originally. So these are all the great associations we partnered with for this webinar series. We're holding webinars every month through the rest of the year. This is the starting of it. So very appreciative of NorCal Clean Cities and Communities for hosting these webinars and providing us all the infrastructure to do this. Again, I'm with MEMA, but also a member of NAFA and the Public Fleet Supervisors Association. And we do have support from the East Bay Clean Cities, Sacramento, San Francisco Clean Cities, Silicon Valley Clean Cities, the California General Services Association, APWA, and Public Fleet Supervisors Association. Without all these partners, we can't get all this information out and make a difference for private and government fleets. So let's go ahead and get into today's webinar. These are the topics that I'm going to cover today. I'm going to start with the California Air Resources Board regulations because they affect us in fleet quite a bit. And then we'll get into some other regulatory programs that we need to be aware of, and that's aerial device inspections, forklift operator training, and then the Bureau of Automotive Repair smog check, and then finally a newer regulation that we're finding not a lot of fleets are aware of, which is electric vehicle charging station testing, which is performed by your local jurisdictions such as cities and counties. But most fleets aren't aware of these tests because they're just now starting to get off the ground, and the people that perform the testing and inspections are getting out into the field and doing them. This is a graph that I've been using for a number of years, and it's to show the regulatory compliance workload, the administrative workload that has been increasing every year. And what I've got up in the corner is we've got a 23% increase in regulations between 2022 and 2026. Those regulations are very complex regulations. They require quite a bit of knowledge, skills, and abilities, as well as research, going to workshops, participating in webinars, learning as much as you can. This is something that I hope you will share, and this whole entire presentation will be shared with all the attendees as a PDF with clickable links in it. But this is something that fleets in general should be using to communicate to executive management the need for a dedicated person to handle regulatory compliance, because it's getting very complex and the amount of hours to manage all these different regulatory programs is increasing on a yearly basis. We'll start with the zero emissions regulatory compliance requirements for the CARB. So CARB created 3 different regulations. They're all companion regulations to advance California's fleets, private and government, to zero emissions vehicles. We have the Advanced Clean Cars 2 rule, which is focused on light duty vehicles, the Advanced Clean Trucks, which is for your medium and heavy duty trucks primarily, and then the Advanced Clean Fleets. The Advanced Clean Cars and Advanced Clean Trucks regulations are geared towards the manufacturers to produce the vehicles, and then the Advanced Clean Fleets regulation is the one that requires fleets to purchase those vehicles that are being produced by the manufacturers. So these are all interlocked regulations to move California forward with more zero emissions vehicles on the road and the benefits that come from that. The Advanced Clean Fleets regulation, for those fleets that remain under the regulation, which is only state and local government fleets, you have a choice of 2 different pathways. One is purchase pathway, your normal purchase pathway of vehicles and equipment. And then the other is a milestone option. I'm going to talk about the purchase choice or option just because that's the one I'm most familiar with. The milestone was really created for drayage trucks, and they're no longer in the regulation. They were removed from the regulation. So for government fleets right now, up until January 1st of 2027, 50% of the purchases we make for trucks that are over 8,500 pounds gross vehicle weight rating have to be a zero emission or near zero emissions vehicle. There were some amendments to the Advanced Clean Fleets rule, and we do expect those amendments to pass the Office of Administrative Law's purview later this year, and those will come in effect on January 1st, and that 50% regulation will stay in place up until 2030. The original regulation had us jumping to 100% purchase on January 1st, 2027, but due to changes in the marketplace, they have backed off on that and given us a break, and so we're going to remain at a 50% purchase requirement. All these links at the bottom that look like website links are all clickable and take you directly to the information that's pertinent to that particular slide. Again, the scope of the ACF is vehicles that are over 8,500 pounds. We have seen some interesting things happen from the manufacturer side. It's fairly difficult to find anybody now that produces or sells a compact cargo van in California. By doing so, it creates a challenge for the manufacturers, so they have quit bringing those into California or producing them, and they're producing cargo vans that are over the 8,500 pound gross vehicle weight rating, which in turn meets their requirements as far as the ACF or ACT regulation. Hybrid vehicles are not considered zero emissions vehicles. Battery electric are, plug-in hybrid electric are, and fuel cell are, which is primarily hydrogen available in California right now as far as vehicles. Most of the manufacturers have been focusing on the low-hanging fruit, which is the easier vehicles to convert to battery electric or hydrogen fuel cell electric, which is your delivery vans, minibuses, cargo trucks, transit buses, and trucks for interstate commerce, particularly the Class 8. Just want to talk real quick about the changes that have been happening in the environmental and regulatory space in California and at the federal level over the last several years. California can regulate its own emissions regulation due to the fact that we had emissions regulations before the federal government did. And when the U.S. Federal Clean Air Act was established in 1970, California was given the ability to have a waiver to continue to have more stringent emission standards because the air quality in California was worse than any other state in the nation at that time. Having those waivers allows other states to adopt California's standards, but they have to do it verbatim. Right now, there's 13 other states in the District of Columbia that have either adopted all or part of California's emissions regulations. And then on January 2025, when we had a change in the federal administration, the CARB staff or CARB withdrew three waiver requests. One was advanced clean fleets for drayage and high priority, which is private fleets and federal fleets, in-use locomotive standards, and commercial harbor craft regulations. The reasoning for the withdrawal is they didn't think the new administration would approve those waiver requests. And so they pulled them back, and instead of having these three waivers denied, they're trying to work with them and move forward with them at a later date and time. The ACF regulation is still in effect for state and local government fleets. And this is some information that's very hard to get out to all the state and local government fleets. The state's aware of it, but we have a lot of smaller local governments, particularly cities, that are not aware the regulation still applies to them, because most of the information that's broadcast on the internet or news says that the ACF regulation is dead, it doesn't apply anymore. When that is correct for federal and private fleets, that still is in effect for state and local government fleets. And again, a link here to get more information about the CARB waiver requests. So in June of 2025, the federal government enacted legislation to rescind the following CARB regulations, which is the Advanced Clean Cars 2, Advanced Clean Trucks, and Heavy Duty Engine and Vehicle Omnibus regulations. California and 11 other states filed suit the same day, stating that the change in federal perspective violated constitutional principles of federalism and separation of powers. Those lawsuits are still in progress. I don't know if we'll have any answers on those this year or even next year. I do suspect some of those lawsuits to advance all the way to the Supreme Court. And that's the federal Supreme Court, not California's Supreme Court. In May, the Nebraska Attorney General announced a legal settlement with CARB that led to a coalition of 17 states challenging the ACF rules in federal court, or this is what it was about. And the settlement focused on CARB repealing the ACF rules that apply to high priority private and drayage fleets. And again, it did not affect the state and local government fleets directly. However, because of the size of the market for private fleets in California, which is about 334,000 trucks that the ACF regulation applied to originally, when those fleets were removed from the regulation, it removed 87% of potential sales for vehicle manufacturers of zero emissions vehicles. So that's created a significant challenge for state and local government fleets, because we're already seeing vehicles that are no longer being produced. We're hearing of ZEB product lines that were supposed to be introduced either being delayed or canceled altogether. And without the volume of that 87%, we do expect to see some of the ZEB manufacturers to possibly restructure and in some cases possibly go into bankruptcy proceedings. This is just listing the requirements. There was a minor amendment to the low carbon fuel standard. Here again are the links. Particularly one that you should pay attention to is the staff presentation slides on the ACF amendments. It's very complex how the amendments were written, and it's a good idea to understand them. We do have a video link in here, and I have the mark set up where you can mark or you can go directly to it and listen into the presentation about the ACF amendments. And again, it's very good information to understand, and I highly recommend watching the video. Here's some of the important regulation language to understand from the amendments that were approved by the board for the ACF. And again, it's the 50% ZEB purchase schedule has been extended to 2030, or it will be once the OAL approves the language. And we do expect that later this year and prior to January 1st. Again, this is just all the language highlighting what's red. I have a lot of information in the slide deck. I'm not going to cover it all, but once you receive the PDF, you'll have a lot of reference material to look over and be able to click on and find the information directly. This one was quite interesting. There was a resolution that was also part of that meeting where the board delegated to the executive officer of CARB the authority to both either approve or disapprove proposed changes in regulatory language. This resolution gave a lot of broad capabilities to the executive director of CARB. There are things that would be a normal process in creating regulations that he or she can choose to follow or not need to follow. And again, they can bring these regulations up in front of the CARB board for review and voting, or they don't need to. Very important to understand this because it gives the executive officer more flexibility to react to changes in the marketplace, changes in federal regulations to try to go back to advancing zero emissions vehicles in the California private and government fleets as quickly as possible. Also, Assembly Bill 1594 went through and gave a better, broader definition, not broader, but more narrow definition of traditional utility specialized vehicles, which is an ICE vehicle owned and operated by a public agency utility. This is all the criteria for it. It gives those particular utilities that have those vehicles a little bit more flexibility in regards to replacing those with ZEVs or not being able to because those particular vehicles that are in the marketplace actually don't meet the duty cycles or the needs of the agency. CARB has done a really good job on their website, updating it with lots of great information, videos, the latest information on changes. One of the things they do have is a web page where they have the CARB Streamlined ZEV Purchase Exemption List. And you can go to this list, and on these particular vehicles, you do not have to submit an exemption request to CARB if that vehicle is on the list, meaning that it's not available or it doesn't meet the needs of the industry. And again, there's a link down there. Click on the link and it'll take you to the list. They're updating it regularly. This one was a slide from last year that I put in there and when it was added, but they are updating it. Take a look at the list. I would recommend checking it once every month, especially if you're finding that there's a vehicle out there that you cannot find that is going to meet your needs, duty cycles, and operational requirements. This is just explaining the list and how it is configured. This is bringing some of those numbers that I talked about earlier about the appeal of the ACF regulation for high priority and drayage fleets and the effects on the marketplace. It leaves only 50,499 vehicles remaining that state and local government own and operate to be converted over to zero emissions vehicles over the next 10 years. That's not a very large market. Most manufacturers don't consider building a vehicle unless you've got 30 to 40,000 sales units for sale or potential units for sale. And so when you're only talking 50,000, that's not much of an incentive for capital programs and everything else that it takes to build a vehicle, especially if it's a startup company. We do expect the ZEVs that are available to be at a higher cost, which has already started to creep up. We're looking at fewer applications to choose from, and we're looking at an increase in ZEV purchase exemption request submissions due to a lack of vehicles in the marketplace that meet duty cycles and operational needs of state and local government fleets. Again, this is reference material, the CARB's ACF main website. Again, it's a great website. They're doing a fantastic job with it. Original final order regulation, the document itself, and then the amendments that were approved by CARB to the ACF regulation. There's fact sheets. There's a link to that. Again, they've got a lot of tools on there. They're updating it regularly. Highly recommend you visit that site, the website, on a regular basis. And then we have the link for the annual and ongoing reporting through the CARB truckers website to be in compliance with the ACF regulation. Very important to sign up to the different regulations so you get the latest information emailed into your inbox. This is giving you the link directly for Advanced Clean Fleets where you can click on it. This is what you will see. You'll hit the subscribe button, give your email address, and then you will be subscribed to an email list dedicated specifically to the ACF regulation. One of the things we've been hearing for years now in the different fleet associations is different small jurisdictions asking, well, it's very expensive for us to convert to zero emissions vehicles. What is the cost differential between being out of compliance and paying fines versus spending the money to be in compliance? This is a chart that was developed with another fleet that was part of our MEMA group email list. I had posted up some information, and that person took the time to go through and associate the primary citation program, tickle penalty statute, and the maximum fine and penalty per assessed per vehicle per day. This is important because those jurisdictions that are having significant challenges with upper executive management supporting the funding necessary to convert to zero emissions vehicles and pay for the vehicles, pay for charging infrastructure, hydrogen fuel station infrastructure, and things like that. I think this is very helpful for those people to use these fines as an example of what could happen. And again, these are per day fines. It does not pay to try to be in compliance by actually being out of compliance and paying the fines. It doesn't pencil out dollar wise. And there's 4 pages of all the different fines that apply. And for the person that is the responsible reporting agent for either the government entity or private entity, they also can be held in county jail for 30 days for violating these regulations, as well as being referred to the federal government for violating EPA regulations, which you don't want to do. We're going to get into the CARB Clean Truck Center. I'm sorry, that's not correct. Clean Truck Check regulation, which is a form of the heavy duty inspection and maintenance program. And this is information that was posted this month, and it's basically making sure fleets understand that this regulation still applies to them. And I'll read it real quick. On January 27th, 2026, the US EPA announced its partial disapproval of the state plan SIP relating to clean truck, and that's a CARB plan. This only means the state cannot credit the portion of emissions reductions from out-of-state vehicles as part of meeting federal air quality standards. The decision does not extend to terminating of enforcing any part of the Clean Truck Check program to ensure all vehicles operating in California abide by the same rules, including vehicles registered outside of California. Have a link at the bottom where you can get more information about that posting. If you're signed up for the Clean Truck Check email list, you would get this sent to your inbox immediately when it's released by CARB staff. So the CT regulation applies to vehicles with a gross vehicle weight rating over 14,000 pounds, almost all non-gasoline vehicles. It does exclude zero emissions vehicles, and it applies to vehicles operating in California public roads and highways, even if they're not registered in California. So it applies to fleets that may have vehicles that are registered outside of California but are being operated inside of California. And this includes federal, state, and local government fleets. Low-use vehicles are also subject to the Clean Truck Check program, which is something that shows up in other CARB regulations where there are exemptions for low-use vehicles, but that exemption does not apply to the Clean Truck Check program. Vehicles the program does not apply to is your emissions vehicles, again, military tactical vehicles and emergency vehicles, but you need to make sure that you read the title in the California vehicle codes to understand what vehicles are considered emergency vehicles. Historical vehicles, again, they are exempt. And then new vehicles that meet a much more stringent NOx standard. And for the first 4 years, motorhomes registered outside of California, vehicles operated on an experimental permit, which is not very many. I've only seen a few manufacturers use those in California. Compliance requirement, report all vehicles through the CARB CTS VIS website portal. You need to register for access to that portal and enter in all your fleet data. Because this regulation started last year, you should have all that information in there. If you don't, I highly recommend you get your fleet information into that portal as soon as possible. That portal is also where you're going to be submitting passing emissions compliance tests, which is the insurance that you're in compliance with the regulation on an ongoing basis, on a per vehicle basis, and then also on an annual compliance basis for your entire fleet. Currently, the testing is twice a year, but beginning in October of this year, for the trucks that have onboard diagnostics, we will be required to test 4 times a year. Very important to know that because you need to plan for that. You need to set up either your spreadsheets or your fleet management information system software to send out reminders to ensure that you maintain compliance with individual vehicles. Doesn't apply to non-commercial motorhomes or agricultural vehicles. And passing the clean truck test results must be submitted up to 90 days before a compliance deadline. There's a link at the bottom with more information in regards to that. There's 3 different types of emissions testing methods. And it depends on the year of the vehicle, if it has onboard diagnostics or not, if it's diesel or not. So these are the 3 different ways of doing that. There's a link down there for hiring a credentialed tester to perform those tests for you if you don't have staff that are certified, as well as I have the link on learning how to have your staff become certified to perform these tests internally and manage the entire program. This is showing just the smoke capacity standards when it's a truck that does not have onboard diagnostics, and which type of engines they have and what the opacity requirements are, and based on also the engine model years. If your staff or a private company has gone through the training and gotten a certification to be able to perform the test, they'll be very much well aware of all this information. The testing fee compliance deadlines are listed here. The bold months indicate the month the compliance fee will be due. This is something new, so now fleets in California are paying their compliance fees on a regular basis instead of once a year, depending on which vehicles are coming due for the test and depending on the size of your fleet. Here's also for testing fee compliance deadlines for California registered vehicles, the DMV registration and the testing annual fee deadline. Vehicles are required to ensure that they paid their annual compliance fee and have no outstanding enforcement violations as part of their compliance demonstration. Bolded months indicate the month the compliance fee is due. Part of the CTC is an annual regulation compliance deadline, and this is a certificate you get for your entire fleet being in compliance annually. But the only way to get that certification is you have to have all your current vehicles in compliance, regardless of when they tested in the year. So they've got to have been tested within the last 90 days. They have to have passed. One of the challenges we've run into with this, if you have a vehicle that's been in a collision and it's taking an extended period of time to be repaired, beyond the ability to retest it to meet the compliance requirements, it causes your overall annual compliance certification not to be available to be printed. In that situation, because this was never programmed into the CTSC BIS software, please reach out to CARB staff directly by phone or email, and they will help you with that situation. And on the back side of the software, they can make an adjustment. Otherwise, the only way to do this, and you need to make CARB aware that you're doing it, is to remove that vehicle from your fleet. So you will be able to get the annual compliance and then put the vehicle back into the software once it's been repaired by either a auto collision repair facility or a dealership that's been waiting on parts or extended warranty delays. And then it's going to come back into the fleet. But CARB staff need to be aware of that because it will be treated differently if they're not aware of it. Very important. Again, some links to the CTC regulation, the main website, and the actual final order regulation, the actual regulatory language. CARB, again, I can't thank them enough. They've done a great job in their websites for ACF and CTC. Lots of FAQs, a lot of videos, a lot of outreach, a lot of the workshop documents are in there. They've done a great job. There's no reason that you can't find an answer to a question. And even if you can't, if you contact them by email or phone call, they've been very responsive over the last 2 years in getting back to fleets. This is the link at the bottom will take you directly to sign up for the CTC email list. Now we're going to talk about the CARB airborne toxic control measure, only to the fact that it's limited to diesel fuel commercial motor vehicle idling. This regulation, the ATCM, applies to a lot of different vehicles and pieces of equipment. We're just going to address the diesel fueled motors that are idling. So this regulation in particular applies to diesel fuel commercial vehicles over 10,000 pounds, licensed for operation on highways, California and non-California based vehicles, and includes vehicles that already have installed alternative idle reduction technologies. And this is just a list of the different types of them. There's a link at the bottom in regards to this regulation. You can click on it and you can get more information about it. So the compliance requirements are that anybody that owns these vehicles needs to make sure that they do not idle for more than 5 consecutive minutes at any location. A lot of the newer trucks have software built into them where that can be programmed in. This also applies to the power units. And again, you need to know of that. And there's some restricted areas where they can actually idle. Idle restriction exemptions, a bus is idling for up to 10 minutes prior to passenger boarding or when passengers are onboarding. These are all the different exemptions. Most of them are going to apply to a very narrow operation situation. The more common ones that we see in fleets are the queuing up for loading or unloading. So that's very helpful that we can idle a little bit longer than that. Also for safety. If it's 100 degrees outside and the truck has air conditioning in it and there's no other place for you to get cooled off while you're waiting, then it's okay to idle the truck. But everything in here, got all the exemption there. You can read through all of these and see if anything applies to your particular situation. Again, the link at the bottom of this page will take you directly to the email list to be able to sign up for it, subscribe to it, and receive updates about this particular regulation. I'm going through a lot of these slides quickly. Want to cover as much as I possibly can. And again, this is reference material, which will be shared with you in a PDF form, and all the links are clickable. Talk about the Portal Equipment Registration Program. This is one that CARB did a great job bringing out because up until its introduction, all the air districts were making their own type of regulations for portable equipment. And if you lived in an area where you had 2 or more air districts, it became very complex and hard to make sure you were in compliance when a piece of portable equipment went from one air district to the next or left one and went into another one, or possibly went through 3 different air districts in a short period of time. Having different regulations made it difficult. They had different EIN numbers on the piece of equipment. The standards were different, the fees were different. So CARB created this PERP program to try to standardize that across the state. By being part of the program, when you meet all of its requirements, that piece of equipment, portable piece of equipment, can travel in and out of other air districts without any problems in being out of compliance with that particular air district's regulations. So it applies to portable diesel fueled engines having a rate of brake horsepower of 50 and greater. All fleets are classified as either small, cumulative horsepower of up to 750, or large, above 750 horsepower. Again, there's a link at the bottom about more about this particular program. Fleet requirements: small fleets must follow the tier phase out schedule. Large fleets can either do the phase out schedule or meet the fleet average emission standards. Notification by June 30th, 2019 required if the fleet average option was desired. So right now, if you've never done this regulation, again, I encourage you to get set up, get it taken care of, and move forward. But it has been in effect since 2019 as far as the choice for large fleets if they're going to go by the fleet average option or the tier phase out option. Again, there's some PERP language links right here for this particular part. This is just showing the tier phase out options. The red arrows point to critical dates. This is the upcoming January 1st of 2027, depending on if you're a large fleet, small fleet, as well as if the engines are rated over 750 horsepower. Again, great reference material to take a look at. This is the averaging option. And again, the deadline of January 1st, 2027. You can see the difference in the PM standard, how it's reduced. This particular webpage has some great fleet reporting tools. It's Excel, and it helps you with filling them out and actually checking to make sure that you're going to be in compliance. Highly recommend using them. This is a list of all the portable engine equipment that are not subject to the regulation. Again, reference material, you can run down through the list and see if you have any portable equipment that may be applicable to have an exemption or not. There's quite a few in there. Have a link at the bottom so you can click on that. It takes you directly to the CARB website to be able to set yourself up through emails to receive the latest information about this regulation directly into your email inbox. Talk about an older regulations that's been around for quite a while, the in-use off-road diesel fueled fleets renewable diesel fuel amendment, which is a mouthful. This is a recent regulation that requires us with off-road equipment to use renewable diesel to power that equipment. There are exemptions, which I have listed right here, but for the most part, it applies to all vehicles that are subject to the off-road regulations, which includes rental fleets that operate in California as well. This is just a few more of the exemptions. Cold weather exemptions, intermittent low temperature exemption, unable to procure. And again, there's links in here, clickable links to take you to any of those that you would like more information on directly from the CARB website. Very important to recognize, though, that what is being sold at public gas stations may not bring you into compliance. We are finding that there's a significant number of stations that are using renewable diesel below the R99 requirement. We've seen them at R98, R97, R90. That fuel does not bring you in compliance with this regulation. It has to be renewable diesel at 99% or 100%. So if you believe that your trucks are using public stations and the fuel meets this requirement, you physically need to have somebody take a picture and show you on the station that's either R99 or R100. Very important to know that. The compliance requirement for this started on January 1st, 2024. Again, using R99 or R100. You need to keep records of your fuel purchases for up to 3 years from the date the transaction was completed. There is annual reporting. It's part of the trucker, or not the truck, yeah, actually, in-use road regulation, where you're going to attest that you're using this type of fuel. And that report is due on March 1st of each year. Again, a link to that regulation and another link to subscribe to email updates in regard to that. And then as far as CARB regulations in general, this is a link to be able to sign up to any CARB regulation that has a list server for it. Currently, I have 58 different regulations that I receive emails on, and they're all related to something that has to do with fleets, fuel stations, auto collision repair facilities, all the things that we may not think about, but we're regulated on. And it's not that hard to sign up for the emails. And typically I receive anywhere from 2 to 5 emails a day. But that's because I'm signed up to 58. The fewer you sign up for, you may only get an email from CARB once a week or once a month, depending on the particular regulation. We're going to shift away from CARB and we're going to talk about aerial device inspections. And the regulation for this resides within the Department of Industrial Relations, otherwise known as Cal OSHA. Applicability, these are the different types of vehicles that this regulation and the inspections apply to. The definition of an aerial device, aerial ladder, articulated boom, and elevating work platform. It's good to know what the differences are because a lot of people assume it's just a bucket truck, but there's variations of the use of an aerial device that you need to be aware of. Here's more on the list of what falls under this regulation, as well as a link at the bottom to click on and take you directly to that regulatory language. The requirements are prior to each shift using the vehicle, visual and operational checks have to be made. You need to track that either through paper or electronic means. Inspection, maintenance, or repairs have to be performed by a qualified person in accordance with the manufacturer's specification. So you need to be looking at the manufacturer's specification, see what training is required or certification is required for your staff to be able to perform the inspections, or if it's a vendor that you sublet work, you need to ensure that they're also qualified to do the work to keep you out of trouble. They do have some information here. If a manufacturer is no longer in business, it becomes fairly complicated when that happens, but it's something that you need to be aware of. Again, a link at the bottom to that information. Records, as with CARB and other regulatory agencies, records are critical. We need to maintain the records, make sure we understand how long each different type of record needs to be kept for. For aerial device inspections, it's at least 3 years, need to be available upon Cal OSHA's request. Part of the information on those documents, the date of the inspections, any deficiency found, correction to actions recommended, and identification of the persons or entities performing the inspection. Then you also need to have records of repairs or adjustments made, again, date, the identification of the persons performing the work, and that it's been signed off. And again, a link at the bottom to click and it'll take you directly to that information. I have a link here of the regulatory language specifically, and then I also have a link to Cal OSHA's website, which has a lot of good information. Another regulation under Cal OSHA is the Powered Industrial Truck Operator Training Program, which is commonly referred to as a forklift operator training, because the majority of the vehicles that we as government and private fleets are going to be operating are forklifts. Although there are a number of other vehicles that qualify as a powered industrial truck. Training requirements, I'm not going to go through all these because there's several pages of it, but basically safe operation. I have the links at the bottom of the pages for each of these. the training program implementation, truck-related topics. These are all the different things. Workplace-related topics, refresher training and evaluation. Really important to know that refresher training needs to be conducted at least once every 3 years. Certification requirements, dates, employee hire dates. And then I've added in here operator rules of the forklifts or powered trucks. And then there's a poster here. This is all critical stuff. You can either pay to have your forklift operators or any of the lift operators trained by independent companies that have instructors that are certified, or if you want, you can actually go through that process internally and get your own staff certified. There's a good training program with that, a train the trainer program. Once they're certified, then they can also issue certifications to your employees. Here at the County of Santa Clara, we have our own internal forklift training program, and we do issue our own certifications. Works out very well, saves us quite a bit of money, and we usually organize a number of people at a minimum to hold a class, but we will, if there's a critical need for smaller departments, we will provide the training and evaluation and certification on an individual basis. Briefly going to talk about the Bureau of Automotive Repair Smog Check Program. Most everybody on the call or on the webinar today is probably familiar with this program, but I thought I'd make sure that we cover it very quickly. Again, this is a lot of reference material. There are vehicles that do not need a smog inspection. This is a list of them. There are some time frames that are different. Diesel vehicles do need to be tested if they're 1998 or newer. This is a list of the vehicles that do not need to be inspected, and some of those are based on how new they are, such as gasoline, hybrid, and alternative fuels. If they're 8 model years and newer, they don't need to have a smog test because typically what CARB staff has found through testing is that they maintain warranty and emission standards and are clean through that 8 model years. And then there's one for 4 model years and newer for a change of ownership. Again, they don't need to be tested. And then you get into some other situations here. When a smog check is required, this is based on private vehicle registrations. When you're talking about a fleet, if you're registered with BAR as a government fleet, then you have a slightly different process for all this. And especially what's good about that is you can perform the inspections on the vehicles yourselves, provided your employees have been trained and certified and have the correct certifications to do so. Change of ownership, again, some of the information in regards to that. Model year exceptions, again, explaining that time frame earlier. Fleet operations, what I just mentioned. Then there's a program called the Continuous Testing Program. It's been around for almost 10 years now. And this is a program where if you install telematics into your vehicles, GPS technology, from a vendor that is part of this pilot program with the Bureau of Automotive Repair, then you don't need to physically perform a smog test on the vehicle, because data is shared on a monthly basis showing that there are no trouble codes stored in the vehicle's computer system, and the vehicle has been passing its key on test. It's the different tests that the computer system goes through every time you turn the vehicle on, and verifying the emission system is working correctly. Great program, minimizes costs for smog inspections, particularly if you're having an outside vendor perform them. Very quick to identify problems with vehicles, get them in, save fuel cost, and ensure that they're repaired earlier rather than later to avoid higher costs. It's a great program. There are certain vendors that are in that program, and here's the list as of today. Forward Thinking Systems, an LLC, Geotab, GPS Insight, Network Fleet, Samsara, and Verizon Connect. And if you want to enroll in that program, there's a link at the bottom to be able to enroll directly into it. This is the fleet operations link where you can go to it directly. And if you choose so, you can register with BAR, and then you can do these different ways of smog testing your vehicles. You can do them internally with your own staff or be part of the continuous testing program. Just for reference, I listed all the different BAR fleet operation contacts. So you have that information. The links are clickable, give you the address of where they're located, their phone number and their cell phone number, their office phone number and their cell phone number. And below each one, it shows you the counties and areas that they cover. So there's 9 different regions in California. Talk about this. This is the last regulation I'll cover, and then we'll go into Q&A. This is a newer one. It actually came about in 2020, but we're finding that a lot of government agencies and private fleets aren't aware of it. And it's your charging stations, which are referred to in the regulation as electric vehicle supply equipment, EVSE. And it's critical that you know about this because there are actually tests that need to be performed on your charging stations. They need to be certified and have a decal placed onto them, similar to fuel stations that are selling gaseous fuel, or actually when you go to the supermarket, the weights and scales they use at the checkout counter, the meat counter, and things like that. So do have a list right here of the EVSA that are not subject to the regulation. Important to know that wholly owned and operated public utilities, public entities, and municipalities are exempt. Charging stations that are not used for commercial purposes, and the dispense of electricity as motor fuel at no cost to the consumer, or wholesale electricity. The challenge that comes up in regards to this is when you have a charging station that is being used by fleet purposes, where there's no cost being charged to the fleet for the use of the station, but it's also open to be used by employees or members of the public. When that happens, then these exemptions no longer apply, because those people are paying for the electricity or the use of the charging station, and the charging station needs to be tested to ensure it is dispensing the right amount of electricity to meet the pricing model that's being used for it. This is who's affected by the regulation. It's manufacturers of the charging stations, businesses that own or operate commercial charging stations, and businesses that install or repair commercially operated charging stations. Again, have links here on that. Typically, it's state and county weights and measures officials that are enforcing this regulation. A link to that as far as the department's website. There's a link here about consumers and letting them know how to do apple-to-apple price comparisons. The enforcement dates, depending on what type of charging station it is, if it's AC powered or DC powered, if it's commercial, if it's new or existing commercial charging stations. All important information to know. There's a link directly to this regulation. And to their credit, the California Department of Food and Agriculture has some great educational resources. And currently, it's almost every month, they're holding a EVSE Info Hour session where they will answer questions. They do a great job. The email address at the bottom is the one that you send an email to and ask to be included in the EVSE Info Hour. The next one is on March 26th from 1:30 to 2:30. I participated in one of these sessions so far, and they've been fantastic in answering questions, especially in very strong or strange situations with charging stations. Here's educational resources and their previous info hour sessions. So you can go in there and see the responses, the actual question and the responses that were provided to the people that were on that call. That info hour is mainly for county and state officials that perform the inspections, but it's also open to charging manufacturers and those that manage charging networks or own charging stations. Very good information, very helpful. And the staff is doing the best they can with this regulation because there's just so many people that aren't aware of it. Fees charged for the testing. For government agencies, it's critical to know this. If you are not charging for the use of the station or the electricity dispensed in your government agency, then that station does not have to be tested. And because it's not tested, you don't need to pay a fee. If somebody comes out and does the testing without talking to you about it, and then they send you an invoice to pay at a later date and time, you can protest that and explain to them that you are a government fleet. You do not charge for the use of the station for either electricity or the station be connected to a vehicle, and no employees and members of the public use the station. The fees being charged by different counties and organizations are significantly vary. I've heard as high as $450 per station. I've seen them charge $125 per port versus per station, because some stations have 2 ports, some stations have 1 port. There's a little variance out there with how it's being applied, which is up to the local jurisdiction. The test itself can take about 15 to 30 minutes, depending on if it's a single port or dual port. There's equipment that's brought in to test the stations. And once they go through all the tests and verify it's within the parameters to be a certified station and it's producing the right reports, then they will take a certification label and place it on the station. We had our stations recently tested about 3 or 4 weeks ago, and this is what the certification looks like from our county SEPA department that actually performs the stations here in station testing here in Santa Clara County. So it gives you an idea. It's similar to what you'd find on a gas station. And I'm done with all the different regulations. We'll go to a Q&A. Again, I want to thank all these organizations for making this possible. This was an idea last year, and that idea has come to fruition. And we're getting a lot of information out there and through as many pathways as we can. We have a lot more information to share. We have a 2-year list of webinars. We've only are announcing this year's, and then we will announce next year's towards the end of this year when the dates that they will be and what the topics will be. The topics that we're covering are ones through a survey that we held with MEMA members, and then we used those surveys and looked at the priorities that our members chose, and then we put those on the schedule to be first, and we're working through them, and regulations was one of the top things that our members wanted to hear, and so that's why we're having the second of 2-part session. So again, thank you to NorCal Clean Cities and Communities for doing all the hosting and pulling this all together for us. MEMA, East Bay Clean Cities Coalitions, NAFA, Clean Cities Silicon Valley, San Francisco Clean Cities, CGSA, APW, and PFSA. Without their help in distributing this information, we would still be struggling to get a lot of the smaller government and private fleets aware of what's going on and what they need to be in compliance with. So at this point, I'll take any questions on any of those regulations that I covered, and I'll do my best to answer them.
So David, I suggest that we start with folks unmuting themselves, and if that gets too crowded, we'll go to raising their hands. I can start off first by saying somebody asked a question in the chat. Are extended range electric vehicles valid for ACF? Thinking of the new F-150 Lightning coming out as well as others in the near future.
Yes, they are. But there is a catch with that. They have to drive a certain number of miles initially as all electric, meaning that the gas engine, which is a generator, doesn't come on. There is a regulation completely separate from the ACF that's referred to for that, and that regulation can change at a much more frequent rate than the ACF being amended. So you need to be aware of that. I do believe the manufacturers, Ford and Ram, in their offerings, they're very much aware that they need to be in compliance with California's ACF regulations for that. But the only way to know for sure is get the specifications from those manufacturers and then go to that website. NorCal Clean Cities and Communities has on their website some older ACF regulation presentations that we broke down into a 5-part webinar series. And within that and the presentations in PDF format is a link to that range requirement and what organization you can find that information on and what the latest is as far as range requirements.
Thank you. And what I think we might do is try to find it and actually post it along with, as long as I'm talking right now, I'll just say we will be posting, as you've mentioned, we will be posting this entire presentation, both the documents and a video of this presentation. And everybody who's who signed up to be in the session will receive information about how to go check that, as well as everybody else that's on our mailing list. And if I can, I'll look up the link and find the link to this second regulation, which I guess you're saying it's made as a separate regulation so they can ratchet up the zero emission miles independent of the regulation itself.
Correct. And I'll see while we're on this meeting, I'll see if I can pull it up and then share it on my screen real quick. Any other
Another
questions?
question came in on the chat. Have you or do you know of anyone that has utilized programs such as the Rivian Adventure Network to have charging infrastructure installed at little to no cost to municipalities?
I'm not aware of any. I can tell you that government agencies are looking for funding as much as possible, but we have properties in certain locations and we have properties in other locations that can't be used for charging infrastructure just because the location of the infrastructure itself, the grid, won't support it. And I'll give you an example. We have 58 different locations here in Santa Clara County that we need to electrify. And there are a number of those locations where there's not enough grid capacity to support our fleet needs whatsoever. And the time frame of bringing in the grid capacity to do that can be upwards of 10 years. And so we're having to look at different ways of meeting our needs in transition to zero emissions vehicles, particularly for the ACF regulation. And we have everything in consideration. We're looking at mobile charging stations. We're looking at battery packs being brought in. We're looking at taking those vehicles and parking them in a different location and county employees picking them up at a location where we can charge them. We're looking at a lot of different things. In the Rivian, I don't know all the details of that program, but it sounds similar to what Tesla did originally, which is if they partner with a company that owns the property, will lease the property or enter into an agreement, then the charging station manufacturer or the vehicle manufacturer will install a charging station and make it available to help grow the public grid, which we need a lot more charging stations in the public grid that are reliable and can charge the latest vehicles a lot faster. So glad to hear about that.
Are there any other questions? Unmute and ask or put it in the chat. Well, David, it looks like you have just about buried everybody with this list of oh, here comes another one. Have you had any conversations with CARB with regard to derating vehicles to meet regulation requirements?
Yeah, we did 3 or 4 years ago when that idea came up, and the answer was no. If you're going to derate a vehicle, you're going to have a problem. Now, what that problem is, I don't know how CARB is going to handle that, but the answer was no.
Any update on the emergency vehicle exemption for utilities?
don't have any updates other than what I have in this presentation. Have not heard any more about meetings between CARB staff and fleet groups in regards to that. I know that we've had discussion with CARB staff on the applicability of that because it's not worded the way we would like it worded. It's a little bit ambiguous in certain areas. And yeah, I don't know if we're going to get some more refined language in that or not. And we're waiting for FAQs or guidance from CARB staff. Other than whatever's on their website, I don't know of anything more recent than that. So this is, I have a link down at the bottom, and I will share this with Tim after this meeting so he can send this information out. And this is from a presentation I did in 2023 showing what the range requirements are. And it's all electric range is what they're referring to as AER, but they have some multipliers depending on the vehicle emissions and a lot of other things. This was from 2023. I'll see if I can give Tim the latest information. I'll check on that, but this is what it looks like. And this is a completely different separate regulation. It's not in the ACF regulation whatsoever. And so this is one that can be adjusted fairly quickly. And those mileage requirements can change. And I believe they already have changed from 2023. But I'll get the latest information to Tim to share with everybody.
We did have one more question that came in. Somebody answered it from internal to the, but you might have something else to add. Have you had any successful purchase exemptions submitted to CARB? If so, what were the vehicle classes you received exemptions for? That's probably a little broader than you can actually go through right now without any reference material, but maybe you could just give a kind of a general answer. Somebody said the city of Pittsburgh got an exemption for a Class 7 dump truck. But you may have some other sort of categorical exemptions that you could reference.
Us in particular, we haven't, because one of the things that's not actually in the regulation is credits, where you buy more ZEVs than you're required to in a single year. CARB is allowing you to hold on to those excess credits, and this isn't in the regulation, and then apply them to the next year. And so that helps us. We're not trying to purchase vehicles the same year that we purchase a ZEV. That way we can, for planning purposes, charging infrastructure, installation reasons, we can use those credits and buy gasoline vehicles or diesel vehicles in a future year because we already purchased the ZEVs. However, part of the administrative requirements of that is we have to use those credits up first before we submit a exemption request. So we currently have an excess of credits, but we're going to be using those up this year. So this year and last year, we could not submit a exemption request for particular vehicles. And so until you use up your bank and it balances out, you cannot you can't even submit the exemption request. You have to use up that first before the exemption request. A year ago, CARB had only had 20 or 32 exemption requests that were submitted. And the number of those that were approved was small because some of those had errors in the application. Some of them didn't include the right information. I do not know what the latest number is. You can email CARB or call them. They've been really great at giving that information out. But again, if you purchase more ZEVs than gas or diesel or a fueled vehicle, you've got a credit and you need to use that up first.
I see.
I'm going to speak on that. Sorry, I know I've been typing in the messages and asking the questions, but I was just curious because we've had the exact opposite response from CARB. So we have credits and we've been getting exemptions completed. So that's why I was just curious about the exemptions primarily.
So you actually had to submit the exemption form to CARB?
Yes, we've had 2 successful exemptions so far, and that's with credits still, without utilizing those credits.
That's news and that's great. If they've changed their mind on that, that's fantastic. There was a fleet about 6 months ago that asked CARB for the specific language in the ACF regulation that would restrict them from submitting a purchase or exemption request when you have more credits. And maybe that caused a change at CARB staff. I will follow up with them because this is the first I've heard of that. And congratulations, because that changes everything.
So one of your exemptions was a class 7 dump. What was the other one?
Sorry, that was Greg Justice from Pittsburgh. I had two successful exemptions, but it was a
Oh.
class 2B and a class 3 that were successful.
Can you describe them just a little bit more than that? What kind of body was on them?
The class 2B was a extended cab 4x4 with a utility body. And then the class 3 was an extended cab 4x4 flatbed.
Lucas,
Thank you.
congratulations and thank you for sharing that information. One of the things we tried to work on with CARB was to allow fleets to use somebody else's exemption request that was approved for their own, so they weren't duplicating all the information. And unfortunately, we could never get CARB staff to agree to that. So one of the things that we have been talking about with NorCal Clean Cities is creating a repository of successful exemption requests that people can at least review and see what type of vehicle it was, and then also what type of information was submitted, so they can cut and paste instead of creating an exemption request by whole cloth.
Yeah, we've been primarily targeting exemptions for the class 2B and class 3 vehicles. We haven't done anything yet above that, so hence my curiosity on the class 4 and up. But yeah, and just thank you again for answering all the questions, David, as well. We're also trying to kind of figure out that derated situation with CHP right now, because that's one of the issues that we're running into. But
Yeah.
the primary purpose of that is because we have plenty of 1-ton vans that wouldn't actually scale tested and determine that they're well underneath the GVWR that's required of them. So we're trying to figure out with CHP if that's a possibility, and then try to work with CARB on that.
Lucas, if you can let me know how that goes, I'd appreciate it. I'd love to get that information out to people.
Absolutely.
Thank you. I appreciate it. That's great information to hear. There's a lot of little nuances to the regulation that were never addressed when it was originally written, even though a lot of fleets, private and government, provided the information to CARB staff. And I understand why. They had some deadlines from a regulatory process standpoint that when they learned new information, they were past certain deadlines and unable to add it into the regulation. And what you're talking about derated, that was one that didn't come up in the conversations. There were a lot of other ones, but I don't remember that one coming up, at least in the meetings that I was in.
Yeah, I mean, the derating, it only really applies for the lower classes of vehicles, because obviously you're not going to derate a class 8 vehicle to 8490, but
Right.
I guess.
But it's very pertinent because we have the Ford F-150 Lightning that's no longer being sold. And that was the only one of the two trucks that's out there that had a pickup bed that could be removed and have something else put on the frame rails, where the Silverado is a unibody. So having that information makes a lot of sense, and it makes sense that they would issue an exemption, a approval of an exemption request.
Have you purchased EV Silverados for the county of Santa Clara?
Yeah, we have several of them and we're purchasing more.
Have you purchased any Rivians?
Have not purchased any Rivians. Last time I checked, they were still a higher price than what we were getting for the Silverados. But I could be wrong. And I love the Rivians. They're a beautiful vehicle, drive nice, everything like that. But the one thing that scared me on the Rivians is a video that it was in regards to auto collision damage, where one of the side panels was damaged. Didn't look like very terrible damage, but the repair cost was $34,000. And the vehicle was out of service for, I think, 3 or 4 months. I'm not real happy with that happening with the Silverado, but I don't think the cost would be that high, and I don't think it would take us that long to get them repaired.
No, you're absolutely right. We actually went through a couple of local body shops to kind of compare costs versus replacing panels or what have you on this EV Silverado and the Rivian. The EV Silverado was pretty inexpensive versus the Rivian.
Yeah, and that's that General Motors just they've got economies of scale on on a lot of things that make them more competitive in that area.
I was mainly curious because we have a lot of local funding available. So the Rivian, the base model actually comes down pretty close to what the cost of the EV Silverado is, but the EV Silverados are just such heavy energy consuming vehicles. That's been the challenge for me to want to purchase them.
Yeah, and that's a challenge I have with them. But at the same time, we have seen ranges of 465 miles, and the Ford Lightning can't even come close to that. We have Ford Lightnings with the extended range battery in them, and we start them up first thing in the morning, and it shows initially a very quick 335 miles, and then you drive 1 mile, it drops down to 278 miles. That doesn't happen in the Silverados so far.
Good to know. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you for the
So
questions. I appreciate it.
yeah, this is the kind of exchange that makes it very useful, obviously for the folks that are online, and this will be part of the recording, so everybody will get a chance who doesn't have a chance to be here. The one thing I was going to mention, David, when you talked about being important to reach out to the smaller municipalities that may not realize that these, especially the ACF regulations still exist, I was going to say that spreading the word to other public agency fleets like water districts and agricultural districts and those kinds of public agencies that wouldn't necessarily fit into the municipal that aren't municipalities but are still subject to the regulation. Um, it would be important to get the word out to. We're doing what we can with NorCal Clean Cities, but for everybody that's online, if you're aware of colleagues that are in smaller public agency fleets that may not realize that they are responsible for meeting the regulations, please advise them, and we will have all this information up for people to watch the video and also look at the slides.
Yeah, and I also recommend if any of the fleets that are on the call today, if you're not a member of a fleet association, you need to join immediately. We're sharing this information through multiple fleet associations, whether they be association for private fleets or government fleets. We're getting this information out quickly. And there's always something that else we'll learn from being members of multiple fleet associations. But if you're not a member, you're already behind. You need to become a member. This information is being shared. It'll come through those associations quicker than any other way. Plug for MEMA, we have group email lists. We have a NorCal group email list, and we have a national group email list. And questions in regards to regulations or anything else, typically if you send a question, you get answers within 10 minutes and multiple answers and multiple variations. And you can connect up with people and they can give you tours of their facilities or answer questions. Works very, very well. Some of the other associations also have group email lists. Highly recommend it. And obviously, the Clean Cities organizations, which goes without saying, they do a fantastic job getting information out to private government fleets and agencies. But it's hard when a smaller agency doesn't have a dedicated fleet manager, and the roles of it are an add-on to some other position. That person is just buried because, as you saw in that original graph, the administrative workload on regulations is growing rapidly. And you have to have dedicated people, or at least a dedicated fleet manager position to keep up with it. Not even to get ahead of it, but just to keep up with it.
Right. Well, I think we can say we've gotten a tremendous amount of information, and this will all be posted as we've noticed. And so, once again, thank you very much, David, for a remarkable presentation and a great summary of regulatory requirements that fleet managers need to be responsible for understanding and complying. And I think we can, Keith, I'm not sure if you're still on. If you are, if there's anything you want to add, please do so. Otherwise, we'll call it quits here. I don't see anybody else joining in, so thank you all very much for joining, and we will then end the webinar. Thanks, David.
Thank you, everyone.